After learning the basics of character design in December, I've decided to create my first 3 proper OCs. If you don't know me or my characters, hi, I'm Frevi, and these are my OCs, Silvie, Sebastian, and Lydia. Now without further ado, let's begin designing. The context for these characters: in a fantasy world full of mages, an evil organization called the Lighthearts is trying to get the scripts, which provide an unnatural power which, in the wrong hands, could destroy the world as we know it. Our 3 characters are a work group established by the Mage Society to stop the Lighthearts from getting another script after they destroyed a currently unnamed region. As you can tell, the story is a work in progress, but it's enough to design my 3 main characters. Design philosophy. My design philosophy emphasizes visual growth, where growth is not just in how they act, but how they dress and the environment around them. I have a pretty typical process, starting on Pinterest, moving on to at least 3 thumbnails of each character, and finally merging what I liked from each character into the final design. Oftentimes, I create one good thumbnail and then the others turn out really bad, so we'll gloss over most of my thumbnails in this video. Starting with our main character, Silvie. She lives in a cottage in the middle of the forest and has perfected the ability to befriend animals. To be specific, she has a strong connection with the long-tailed tit, a very cute species of bird. Because of where she lives, she has a homesteader lifestyle, growing her own food utilizing magic. As she lives in the wood, she's had to develop offensive magic to protect herself from wild, aggressive animals. As of the last few years, animals have become significantly more aggressive because of the Lighthearts' experimentation with magic. Because of this, she's actually quite strong. However, because of her isolation in the forest, she possesses a debilitating naivety that she needs to break through. In case it wasn't obvious enough, she's very Rapunzel and Shen Chao coded. Rapunzel was my favorite Disney princess growing up, while Shen Chao is the MC of my favorite book series, so you can definitely see their personalities and life stories within Silvie. The overall most important things to incorporate in her design is the long-tailed tit and her cottage lifestyle. I decided that I like this thumbnail the most based on its simplicity, and I like the amount of bows in the design. It reminds me a bit of the JoJo Siwa bows that everyone in my primary school had, which I think ties in well with her naive personality. I also used the bows as a way to integrate the long-tailed tit bird into the design, making them resemble wings. I chose the color scheme based on the long-tailed tit with the white, brown, and black, while also adding some pink into the design to make it a bit more personal to her. The last bird-focused design element is her cape, which pays homage to the bird's tail. I kept most of the chosen thumbnail design elements in the final design, however I made a few changes to make the 2 main points even more clear. I made a change to her cape to both improve the silhouette and make it slightly wing-shaped. As she gets more life experience, the wing shape will become more pronounced, signifying her ability to fly into new situations without the naivety she had before. To show her college lifestyle, I added many tools and pockets on her cape, making it both aesthetically pleasing and functional. The items in her pockets can also be changed out for things that can signify her becoming a so-called better person, aka visual growth. I also added wildflower seeds into her cape, further showing the homesteader lifestyle while also linking back to her connection with nature. Admittedly, her homesteader lifestyle was a bit of an afterthought in her design, only being included retroactively in the final design. Despite this, I think that's still communicated enough. Moving on to Sebastian, my grumpy elite bodyguard. He's a bodyguard by day, working in the defensive team by protecting the elites of society, and an artist by night. Making up a new art style for him is going to be a nightmare, but that sounds like a problem for future me. Yay! As a guard, he works tirelessly on protecting the elites of society. Because of this, he wears work fashion casually. He was the first character I designed long before I started learning how to effectively design characters. Because of this, his design process is a lot less streamlined and honestly quite confusing. I made this design for him knowing that he would be an elite bodyguard and made up everything else as I went. Despite this, I actually kept most of his design intact within the final version. I didn't want him to look like a knight, both because I'm not very interested in them and because as a part of a private defense team, I didn't want his design to stand out as someone that would go to war. I more so envisioned his team as like a stealth team, protecting the elites of society from the shadows. While this does blur his occupation a bit, I think this gives me more room to get creative with his design and offer more chances to integrate my beloved visual growth. To ensure that his job is still alluded to in his design, I use more subtle things like his color scheme. I tried to stick to mostly neutral colors as if they'd help him be unnoticeable in a crowd. Despite this, I still wanted him to have a more luxurious color as well to signify his connection to nobility. I ended up choosing a light and dark blue color to pepper into his design here and there. I chose blue because of its associations to loyalty personality, which, considering his jobs, I wanted to highlight in his design. I deliberately chose a light and dark version of the blue colour. If you've gotten this far in the video, try to guess the reason in the comments. When I started designing him, I wanted him to have a trench coat. There wasn't any true design reason for this, I just thought that they looked cool, and so I centered the initial design on this big, luxurious trench coat. Though I also made a no-coat design. Retrospectively, I think his design reminds me a bit of Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean, but most of this part of the design got to stay in the final one. Side note, I'd never really drawn boots before, so these things were an absolute nightmare. I think I spent a solid hour trying to figure them out, and that was with references. I wanted to make his design more formal, showing how he prioritizes work over anything else. Because of this, I gave him a dress shirt and some practical trousers I based off of cargo pants. Eventually, I added a vest on top of his shirt as the values contrasted too much with the trench coat. One issue with this design was the lack of personality, and so I added a sketchbook to his belt alongside some magic art supplies. Overall, I think that this initial design does show his prioritization of work while also showing a hint of his personality. However, it has one major flaw. I hadn't studied muscular men at the time, still haven't to be honest, so his muscles are quite sad looking considering his occupation. After learning how to do the basics of character design properly, I decided to revisit his design, creating 3 thumbnails for him. I was actually quite happy with his original design without the trench coat, so kept a lot of the elements within this thumbnail. The main change I made was to add more gold to his design. I felt that his connection to the elites of society weren't particularly obvious, so wanted to add something a bit more fancy to his otherwise plain design. Another change I made was to remove the vest of his shirt as he didn't need it without the coat. While they may look identical, there are a few small differences which I think elevate the final design. I found a middle ground between the high amount of gold in the thumbnail and low amount of gold in the original design. I thought that while he did need gold to make his elite connections obvious, he shouldn't have too much. I didn't want to complicate the values of colours, and having too much gold would make him seem like the very elites that he protects. Fortunately, the main change I made was his build. I made his muscles much more pronounced, emphasizing his time spent training and working as an elite guard. Finally, Lydia's design. Despite making her final design last, she actually has the least established background of the trio. All I really knew about her was that she's an adventurer that lives within an empty dungeon. I also know that, as the healer of the team, she uses a mix of magic and alchemy. She didn't have a design motif like Silvie did. I was really just going for an adventurer vibe and seeing what stuck. Because of this, her design might change sooner than the others, but at the moment, I think that her design communicates what it needs to well enough. Again, I made her first design before learning how to do character design properly, so it looks quite random and her personality is not shown at all. Her first design was quite the mess. Her design was an amalgamation of many different ideas from my Pinterest board, pretty sloppily attached to one character. There wasn't much thought behind the decisions other than, this looks pretty, let's add it. Like Sebastian, she had a coat, or in her case a cape, and a no cape design. I wanted to show her negative personality using the bright orange in her design to signify danger, but think that, especially when paired with the brown, she's giving more pumpkin than ferocious adventurer. I think the only thing this design communicated well was her Mage Society membership. As she gets her commissions directly from the Mage Society, she has the emblem everywhere on her clothes, from her gloves to her shoes. Otherwise, I think this design really failed at communicating anything about her. After learning the basics of character design, I jumped at the opportunity to redo her awful design. I actually loved her first thumbnail and so based her final design off of it, ignoring most of the elements from her first design. I included a variety of shape design to show a negative personality trait that I'm not going to spoil for you. I also changed her main colour from an aggressive orange to a still noticeable blue colour. I feel that this fits her personality a bit better and alludes to her main character flaw. For the final design, I made a few changes. I decided to add the external pocket attached to her belt and kept the mismatched gloves as they show what hand she uses to hold her staff. I really like the final design. I like how her hair somewhat resembles a jellyfish. I actually took that design element from her third thumbnail, which was vaguely sea themed. I think that, though her dress isn't practical for an adventurer, it allows for some scope for some visual growth in ways that, again, not gonna spoil for you. With all 3 characters complete, we have our main trio. I really like Silvie's design, and I think that's got a lot of room for visual growth built in. It's the strongest design out of the 3, though you could argue that Sebastian's design communicates who he is as a person and his priorities a bit better. If you like these characters, I've got an Etsy shop selling prints, and in the future I'll start selling stickers. You'll also see much more of these characters in the future as I get my social media back in control, so subscribe to see that.